In this video, we're going to study chapter 11 of Theophrastus' characters. We're going to study the Parsimonious man. These lessons are quite simple, so I'm going to read through the text, make a few comments to try and clarify any points that may cause students some confusion, and we're going to keep moving. The real value of this study is in the use of it. So once you learn about the Parsimonious man, your concern should be, first of all, not committing the faults of the parsimonious man, looking for these qualities in others and being wary of them, and avoiding the errors that we read about in the characters sketched out for us by Theophrastus. So let's read about the parsimonious man. Theophrastus starts out by giving us an explanation of what parsimony is. Parsimony is an excessive and unreasonable sparing of expense. Parsimony is an excessive and unreasonable sparing of expense. So a parsimonious man is a man who tries to save money, but he does so in an excessive and unreasonable way. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with trying to save money. We're all limited in the resources that we have, and it's our responsibility to use our money or our time or any other resource we have as well as we can. We have to be careful with how we spend things. But the parsimonious man tries to spare expenses in a way that is excessive and unreasonable. Okay, so we're going to look at this fault of parsimony, where a man tries to save money in an excessive and unreasonable way. The parsimonious man calls at the house of his debtor to demand a halfpenny of interest left over in the last month's payment. So he goes and asks for money that's owed to him, even though that money is an extremely small amount, and it's not worth the effort that he needs to make to go and try to collect it. A halfpenny of interest left over from the last month's payment, he goes and calls at the house of his debtor asking for that payment. That's excessive and unreasonable. At a banquet, he carefully notes how many cups of wine are drank by each guest, and of all the offerings to Diana, usual on such occasions, his will be the least. So at a banquet, which is a time for celebration, where we always go a little extreme in eating and drinking because it's a celebration, and doing so at a scheduled event where there's some special occasion and we gather together with others, we share and we celebrate, and we maybe eat a little bit extra, drink a little extra. At a banquet, the parsimonious man is counting how many cups of wine are being drunk. And when it's time to make an offering, of course Theophrastus was a Greek, so he refers to the practice of Greek religion and the worship of the Greek gods and goddesses. Here he names Diana. When it's time to give an offering, his will be the least. So when it's time to offer, to make a religious sacrifice or offering, that's where he's going to try and save some money. His attempts to save money are excessive and unreasonable. If the smallest article is purchased for his use, however low may be the price, he will say it is too dear or too expensive. When a servant breaks a pot or a pan, he deducts the value of it from his daily allowance. So the servant is not allowed to have any accidents. Anything that's broken or damaged, even if not intentional, gets deducted from that servant's salary, which we know is already going to be very low. If his wife chances to lose a brass button or a farthing, he causes tables, chairs, beds, boxes, all to be moved, and the wardrobe to be hunted over in search of it. Again, some small amount of money or some small item like a brass button is lost, and he has the whole house turned upside down and torn apart to try and find this little bit that's lost. And one of the reasons he does this is not because he's really so careful. As we see in his own life, he won't be careful. We'll see that he does this out of a sort of desire to humiliate his wife who lost something, draws all this attention, makes this great big fuss about it, and all we're looking for is a button or a farthing, a very small amount of money, like a lost nickel or quarter in the house. Whoever would deal with him must be content to lose by the transaction. Anyone who does business with him, he doesn't do business according to the golden rule. He doesn't seek to do good for his neighbor. He doesn't seek to do to others as he would have them do to him. Anytime there's a transaction, anytime there's a business deal, his only concern is his own profit. Whoever would deal with him must be content to lose by the transaction. He suffers no one to taste a fig from his garden, nor even to pass through his fields, no, nor to gather a fallen date or olive from the ground. So if he's got a garden full of fruit, he acts as if he can't spare a single fig or a single fruit that's fallen to the ground. He must have every single one. It's an excessive and unreasonable effort to spare expenses. He inspects the boundaries of his farm every day to assure himself that the hedges and fences remain in their places. So not only does he have a piece of land, he has to make sure that every single inch of that land is secured and protected. He demands interest on interest. If payment is delayed a day beyond the appointed time, if he gives a public dinner to his ward, he carves out a scanty portion for each, and himself places his allowance before every guest. He goes to market and often returns without having purchased an article. He goes to the store, but everything's too expensive, so he ends up coming home with nothing. He strictly charges his wife to lend nothing to her neighbors, no, not even a little salt, nor a wick for a lamp, nor a bit of cumin, nor a sprig of marjoram, nor a barley cake, nor a fillet for the victim, nor a wafer for the altar. For, saith he, these little matters put together make a great sum in the year. In a word, you may see the coffers of such a fellow covered with mold, and himself with a bunch of rusty keys at his girdle, clad in scanty garb, sparingly anointed, shorn to the scalp, and slipshod at noon. And you may find him in the fuller's shop, whom he is charging not to spare earth in cleaning his cloak, that it may not so soon require dressing again. This is the parsimonious man. Now, as I said, there's nothing wrong with trying to be careful with your money and possessions, to take care of things, to avoid waste, and so on. But what marks this man is that his efforts to spare expenses are excessive and unreasonable. And we have to ask, what would motivate a man to be like this? And there's a couple of simple reasons that we can think about why a man would be motivated to fuss so much about expenses. First of all, the money that we gain, we often gain through work. And therefore, if a person doesn't like to work, they're also going to complain about expenses, because when such a person does any work and makes some money, he wants that money to last forever because he doesn't want to have to work again to gain more money. And so a person who is parsimonious will often be a person who doesn't like to work. Secondly, a person who is parsimonious doesn't love his neighbor. He doesn't love his neighbor as himself. He doesn't do unto others what he would want done unto himself. Everything is for his own personal gain and profit, and everyone else is to be used at the lowest price possible to him for his own benefit. So he's a selfish man and not generous. And thirdly, he's an ungrateful man. And this applies mostly to Christians. If we consider how God deals with us, is God a parsimonious master? Does God treat us the way that this man treats his wife or his servants or others that he does business with? Does God treat us in this way? No, God is very generous with us. God is generous with us. When we do evil, God is merciful. He forgives our sins. Jesus tells us when someone sins against us and confesses his sin, we're to forgive him as many times as he asks for forgiveness. We're to be generous with forgiveness and kind and merciful because God is merciful to us. When Christ came into the world, did he live a parsimonious life? Was he careful to never waste anything or never spare every expense? No, he was very generous. Christ teaches us that if a man asks for your cloak, give him your tunic also. If he asks to go a mile, go 2 miles. Jesus teaches us to be generous. And there's a reason for that. The reason why we can be generous is because God is generous. And when a man believes that God is generous, that man will also be generous because he's not afraid. Jesus says, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink or what you shall wear. Don't be anxious for these things. Don't worry about these things. But he says, but know that your heavenly Father knows that you need these things. Look at the birds of the air. They don't plant gardens or sow fields. They don't gather their food into barns and store it for the winter. They live day by day just focused on the next meal. They never think about the future. And they live as examples of what it looks like to trust in God because God is generous. But this parsimonious man is not mindful of God. He's not grateful. He's not thankful for God's generosity. And we can see that in his own lack of generosity. He's afraid of losing something because he's not sure if he can get it again. So we can see not only the behavior of the parsimonious man, but we can look a little bit deeper into what makes a man act in this way. All right, so chapter 11, the parsimonious man. You should know what parsimony is. You should understand that it's not merely trying to save money. So if your mother tells you to turn the light off because you're wasting electricity, or to turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth because you're wasting water, that's not necessarily parsimonious. In fact, what's more reasonable? To let the water run for no reason or to turn it off? That's reasonable. The parsimonious man is a man who seeks to save money in an excessive and unreasonable way. We need to avoid being parsimonious. We need to be willing to work to earn what we need. And as St. Paul says, to be willing to work that we may share, not just for our own needs, but also to be able to have an abundance that we can share with others. We're to not be selfish in our dealings with others. We're to practice the golden rule. And we're to be thankful for God's generosity, and we're to be imitators of God. And when God gives things to us, we're to understand that we have freely received them from God's generosity, and we're freely to give them and share with others whose needs are equal to or greater than our own. So let's consider these things as we study the parsimonious man. Let's try to avoid being parsimonious and also watch out for those who are parsimonious, because they'll always be seeking to take advantage of us and burden us with their desire to save money in an excessive and unreasonable way. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies. How obnoxious is that?